The morning sun filtered through the stained-glass windows of Shadow Peak's Great Hall, casting jeweled patterns of crimson and gold across ancient stone floors where generations of wolf kings had held court. At the raised dais, Alpha King Marcus Ironwood commanded the space with the natural authority of a man born to rule, his dark hair catching the light as he listened to reports that would shape his kingdom's future. The air hummed with pack energy, that invisible current connecting every wolf in the room through bonds of hierarchy and blood, bonds that had sustained their kind through centuries of darkness and war. High Chancellor Mordanna Blackthorn stood before the assembly, her auburn hair arranged beneath a circlet of silver that marked her elevated status among the court. She delivered the morning's business with characteristic efficiency. The harvest reports exceeded expectations. Border patrols reported no vampire incursions for the third consecutive month. The Treasury remained stable despite increased military expenditure following last winter's skirmishes with rogue packs from the Northern Territories. Every word was precise, every gesture calculated, every recommendation designed to demonstrate why she had become the most trusted advisor in Marcus's 8-year reign. Marcus nodded his approval, grateful once again for the woman who had transformed his court from the chaotic aftermath of war into a well-oiled machine of governance. Since her appointment 3 years ago, Mordanna had proven herself indispensable. Her noble birth, her sharp political instincts, her unwavering loyalty to the crown had made her the pillar upon which much of his administration rested. The older nobles deferred to her judgment. The younger wolves respected her strength. Even Captain Theron, his own beta and closest friend, had grudgingly admitted that Mordanna's organizational skills were unmatched. As the Chancellor gestured elegantly toward a servant approaching with documents, Marcus found his attention drawn not to the papers, but to the young woman who carried them. She moved with unusual grace for someone of apparently common birth, her steps measured and careful as she crossed the hall. Her dark hair was pinned severely back, revealing a face that would have been stunning if not shadowed by what appeared to be perpetual fear. But it was her eyes that arrested him completely. Violet. Not the pale lavender of some humans, but deep, pure violet that seemed to glow with inner light when they caught the sun streaming through the windows. Marcus's wolf stirred for the first time in years. The sensation was so unexpected, so powerful, that he nearly stood from his throne. His inner beast, dormant since the death of his first mate in the border wars, suddenly surged forward with an intensity that made his hands grip the armrests until his knuckles went white. The wolf within every alpha was more than instinct. It was consciousness, wisdom, primal knowledge that transcended human understanding. And his wolf was screaming a single word that sent shock waves through his entire being: mate. But that was impossible. The young woman approaching had no wolf scent, no pack marker, no trace of the supernatural energy that every shifter carried like a signature. She smelled of moonflowers and starlight, scents that shouldn't exist because those flowers had died out decades ago. She moved with the fluid grace that came from wolf muscle memory, yet there was no wolf presence around her. She was a contradiction, an impossibility, and his wolf was going absolutely mad, trying to reconcile what his instincts screamed against what his senses reported. The woman placed the documents before him with trembling hands, and when their eyes met for perhaps 2 seconds, Marcus saw intelligence there. Deep, profound intelligence, quickly hidden behind lowered lashes and submissive posture. But in that brief moment of connection, something passed between them. Recognition on some level that transcended conscious thought. His wolf lunged forward so hard he nearly shifted right there in the throne room, something that hadn't happened since he was a barely controlled adolescent. He forced the beast down with every ounce of alpha will he possessed, but the effort left him breathing harder than he should be from simply sitting still. The woman curtsied deeply, her movements showing years of practice, but her hands shook, her breathing was shallow, and when Mordanna spoke her name, she flinched, not obviously, not in a way that anyone not watching closely would notice. But Marcus was watching closely now, his senses hyper-aware of every micro-expression, every tension in her posture. "This is Alara," Mordanna said, her tone carrying subtle disapproval. "She serves as my personal assistant, Orphaned during the Moonwhisper Massacre 8 years past, taken in by the castle's charity. She is adequate for simple tasks, though somewhat limited in her capabilities given her unfortunate background. The Moonwhisper Massacre. Marcus's jaw tightened at the reference to one of the darkest chapters in recent pack history. 8 years ago, an entire pack had been slaughtered in a coordinated attack so brutal that even hardened warriors had wept at the aftermath. Men, women, children, elders, all put to the sword or burned in their homes. The official reports blamed rogue vampires, but the efficiency of the attack, the complete annihilation of every pack member, had always struck Marcus as suspiciously thorough. The Moonwhispers had been an ancient line, keepers of old magic and older secrets. Their eyes were legendary, a mark of lunar bloodline so rare that most believed the trait had died out generations ago. And here stood a young woman with those same distinctive eyes, labeled as an orphan of that massacre, serving as a personal assistant to his chancellor, with all the terrified deference of someone who had learned that survival required absolute submission. The border conflicts claimed many innocents, Marcus said carefully, his voice controlled despite the turmoil of his wolf. It speaks well of our Christian duty that the castle provides sanctuary for those left homeless by war. Indeed, Alpha King, Mordanna replied, her smile remaining composed, though sometimes charity requires firm guidance to ensure proper gratitude and behavior. Those who arrive broken must be carefully molded into useful members of our household. Firm guidance, carefully molded. The words were diplomatic, proper, exactly what any noble might say about managing servants. But something in the way Mordanna spoke them, some slight emphasis on the word molded, sent warning signals through Marcus's battle-honed instincts. And the way Alara seemed to shrink slightly when her mistress spoke, as if expecting some form of correction or punishment, suggested a relationship that extended far beyond normal supervisor and subordinate dynamics. Alara said nothing, merely curtsying again before retreating to the shadows beside Mordanna's position. She remained motionless throughout the rest of the session, hands clasped in front of her, eyes downcast in servant deference. Yet Marcus sensed an alertness in her stillness that spoke of constant vigilance. When Mordanna spoke, the girl's breathing would quicken almost imperceptibly. When the Chancellor moved, even slightly, Alara would track the motion before quickly returning to her downward gaze. This was not the behavior of someone grateful for sanctuary. This was the behavior of prey in the presence of a predator, always calculating escape routes, always preparing for the next attack. The business of kingship continued. Treaties needed ratification. Tax assessments required approval. Military deployments demanded strategic oversight. Marcus forced himself to focus on these critical matters, but his attention kept drifting to that silent figure in the shadows. Every instinct he possessed, every sense honed through years of warfare and leadership, told him that something was profoundly wrong. His wolf continued its agitated pacing, demanding that he act, that he protect, that he investigate this impossible mate who appeared to have no wolf but whose very existence made his beast roar with possessive fury. When the morning session finally concluded and the great hall emptied of nobles and petitioners, Marcus found himself alone with his beta, Captain Theron Steelheart. The younger man had served at his side through the worst of the border wars, had proven his loyalty and tactical brilliance in a dozen campaigns. If anyone could be trusted with troubling observations, it was Theron. "The servant girl troubles you, Alpha," Theron said quietly. It was not a question. After years of fighting together, reading each other's moods was second nature. Marcus leaned back in his throne, allowing some of the tension to show now that they were alone. "My wolf insists she is mate, but she has no wolf scent, no pack marker, no presence in the bond network that connects our kind. Either my instincts are failing, or something is very wrong." Theron frowned, his own wolf rising to assess the information. "I have seen trauma suppress wolves temporarily. Severe enough shock can push the beast so deep that detection becomes difficult. But 8 years? That would require constant reinforcement, systematic suppression." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Suppressing a wolf was not simply cruel. It was a specific form of torture, one that required knowledge, effort, and sustained application. A wolf buried that deep would be in constant agony, fighting to emerge while being forced down again and again. The fact that Alara appeared functional, able to work and serve, while enduring such suppression spoke to either incredible strength or incredibly sophisticated methods of control. "There is something else," Marcus said slowly. "Her eyes. That is the moon whisper marker, the bloodline that was supposedly eradicated 8 years ago." Theron's expression darkened. If she truly is Moon Whisper, then she is not just any wolf. The old texts speak of their gifts: empaths, healers, those who could influence even alphas through the strength of their presence alone. Some whispered they were omegas, though such things are considered myth now. Omegas, the rarest classification of wolf, so rare that most modern packs believe them extinct or legendary. Unlike alphas who commanded through dominance, or betas who supported through strength, or deltas who served through loyalty, omegas were said to balance entire packs through empathic connection. They could soothe alpha rage, heal psychological wounds, create bonds that made packs nearly unbreakable. They were also vulnerable in ways that made them targets. An omega broken or controlled could devastate pack dynamics. An omega killed could shatter pack bonds entirely. If Alara was indeed omega, then her suppression took on even darker implications. Someone wanted her power locked away, her potential destroyed, her very existence hidden, and that someone had access, opportunity, and the knowledge required to accomplish such a feat for years without discovery. Marcus made his decision. "I want discreet observation: who she interacts with, where she goes, what tasks she is assigned. But most importantly, I want to know about her relationship with Chancellor Mordanna. Something about their dynamic troubles me deeply." "I will assign wolves I trust completely," Theron promised. "But Alpha, if your suspicions prove correct, if the Chancellor is involved in something dark, the political ramifications could tear the court apart. Mordanna has powerful allies. Her family connections run deep. Accusations without irrefutable proof could trigger internal conflict we cannot afford, while vampire threats loom at our borders." "I am aware," Marcus said grimly, "which is why we investigate quietly. Gather evidence, understand the full scope before taking action. But Theron, if that girl is being harmed, if she is mate and omega and victim all at once, then I will not allow political considerations to prevent justice. Some principles matter more than convenience." That evening brought the Harvest Feast, a tradition that filled Shadow Peak's halls with celebration and drew nobles from across the kingdom. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh breads, autumn fruits, and barrels of wine from the castle's finest vintages. The great hall blazed with firelight and pack energy as wolves in both human and shifted forms mingled in the relaxed atmosphere that came from successful harvests and relative peace. Marcus observed from the high table, noting with satisfaction how his court functioned under Mordanna's expert management. Every detail had been orchestrated efficiently, from the placement of visiting dignitaries to the precise timing of each course. Servants moved through the crowd like ghosts, appearing when needed and vanishing when their tasks were complete. It was during the third course that he spotted her again. Alara carried a silver pitcher of wine, refilling goblets with practiced efficiency while remaining virtually invisible to the nobles she served. But Marcus could not stop watching her. His wolf refused to settle, pacing and snarling in the confines of his mind, demanding that he act, that he claim, that he protect. The mate bond was trying to snap into place, but something blocked it, some barrier that prevented the full connection from forming. It was like trying to grab smoke, sensing something vital just beyond reach while being unable to close the final distance. She moved differently here, he noticed. When approaching tables of older, established nobles, her posture was respectful but relatively relaxed. But when she neared groups of young deltas, arrogant males who had not yet learned true discipline, her entire demeanor shifted. Shoulders hunched slightly. Steps became quicker, more nervous. Head bowed lower. This was not the general deference of servant to noble. This was specific fear directed at specific threats. One such group called out as she approached to refill their goblets. Sir Edmund, a Delta barely into his 20s, son of a minor noble house, gestured dismissively as she poured. "Careful, girl. This vintage costs more than your annual wages. Perhaps you should practice on the servants' tables before attempting to serve your betters." His companions laughed at the casual cruelty. Alara's hands trembled slightly, causing a single drop of wine to splash on the table's edge. Color rose in her pale cheeks, but she merely curtsied and murmured an apology so quiet that Marcus could barely hear it from his elevated position. There was dignity in her response, a composure that seemed at odds with her supposed lowly station. Most servants would have either cowered completely or shown some spark of resentment. Alara displayed neither reaction, just careful, practiced submission that spoke of extensive training in enduring humiliation without reaction. "Edmund grows more insufferable with each passing season," muttered Lord Garrett, the aging Castellan who had served Marcus's father before him. "His father spoiled him terribly before the fever took them both last winter." Marcus watched Alara finish her service and retreat, her movements still carrying that odd grace despite the obvious distress. Perhaps he requires reminder of proper behavior toward those under our protection. Garrett glanced at him with surprise. "Of course, Alpha King, though servants must learn to tolerate minor discourtesies. It builds character, or so my own father used to claim." Character. Marcus wondered what sort of character was built through systematic humiliation versus what was revealed when someone maintained grace under such treatment. Throughout the evening, he found himself noting other interactions, how Alara seemed to anticipate needs before they were voiced, how she navigated through crowds without ever brushing against a guest, how she became nearly invisible while remaining perfectly attentive to her duties. These were skills that took years to develop, and they suggested training far beyond what any common servant would receive. Near the evening's end, as nobles began retiring to their chambers in various states of intoxication, Marcus caught sight of Mordana speaking quietly with Alara near the servants' entrance. Though he could not hear their words over the hall's ambient noise, he observed their body language with growing interest. Mordana's posture was commanding, authoritative, circling the younger woman like a predator assessing prey. Alara stood perfectly still, hands clasped, head bowed in that same submissive posture she always adopted in her mistress's presence. When Mordana gestured sharply, Alara flinched. The reaction was so subtle that Marcus would have missed it if not watching specifically for such tells. It was not the normal startle response to sudden movement. It was the flinch of someone expecting pain, someone whose body had learned through repeated experience that sharp gestures preceded violence. Then Mordana placed her hand on Alara's shoulder, and the girl went rigid. Every muscle locked, breathing stopped, skin paled. For 3 seconds, that felt like an eternity, she stood frozen under that seemingly casual touch. When Mordana removed her hand, there was visible relief in the line of Alara's shoulders. Marcus's wolf surged forward with such force that he felt his canines lengthen slightly, had to focus all his considerable will on maintaining human form. The protective instinct was overwhelming, irrational, undeniable. That was his mate being touched by someone who made her freeze in terror. That was his omega being controlled through fear. Every alpha instinct demanded he cross the hall and remove the threat. Damn the political consequences. But he was not just alpha. He was king, and kings could not act on instinct alone, no matter how powerful. So he forced the beast down, controlled his breathing, and filed away what he had witnessed as additional evidence requiring further investigation. Mordana approached the high table moments later. "The evening has been most successful, Alpha King. High standards must be maintained in all things." "Your attention to detail continues to exceed expectations," Marcus replied diplomatically, studying her face for any sign of the predator he had glimpsed moments before. But she was composed, controlled, presenting the image of a devoted chancellor. If he had not seen the interaction with Alara, he would never suspect the darkness that might lurk beneath such presentation. "Discipline and order create the foundation upon which greatness is built," Mordana said, her emerald eyes holding something calculating. "The orphans we have taken in require particular attention. Their backgrounds often lack proper training in service or respect for authority. But with patience and consistent discipline, even the most challenging cases can be molded into adequate servants." There was that word again, molded. And the way she emphasized challenging cases made Marcus wonder if she was referring to someone specific, someone with distinctive eyes and a suppressed wolf and trauma so deep that 8 years had not been enough to heal it. "I imagine such work requires considerable personal attention," he observed carefully. "Indeed," Mordana agreed, "some individuals require more intensive guidance than others, but the results justify the effort invested. Shall we discuss tomorrow's agenda?" The smooth deflection was masterful, steering conversation away from territory that made her uncomfortable while maintaining courtesy. They discussed upcoming diplomatic missions, trade negotiations with neighboring pacts, and preparations for winter. All the while, Marcus kept seeing that frozen moment, that flinch, that terror hidden behind submission. When Mordana finally departed and Marcus could retreat to his private chambers, he found Theron waiting with preliminary reports from the wolves assigned to observe Alara's movements. What they described painted a picture that made his wolf rage with protective fury. Excessive workloads that should have been distributed among multiple servants, tasks requiring physical strength beyond what her slight frame should manage, assignments that isolated her from potential allies or witnesses, and injuries. Small ones, carefully hidden, but noticed by sharp-eyed wolves who knew what to look for. Burns on forearms covered by long sleeves, bruises on ribs hidden beneath high collars, weight loss suggesting inadequate food despite castle abundance. But most damning was the testimony of Maeve Ironhearth, the head cook who had worked in the castle kitchens for 40 years. She had found Alara 8 years ago, collapsed in the castle gardens, half dead from exposure and starvation. The girl had been unable to speak for months, traumatized to the point of catatonia. It had taken years of gentle care for her to recover enough basic function to work. And then she had been reassigned to serve directly under Mordana Blackthorn, and the healing had stopped, reversed. The light that had slowly returned to those eyes had dimmed again, replaced by the constant vigilance of someone expecting the next blow to fall. "Maeve says she tried to report concerns once," Theron said quietly. "Went to guard Captain Davith, thinking perhaps he might investigate discreetly. He listened, seemed troubled, promised to look into the matter, found dead in his quarters 2 days later. Natural causes, according to the official report, though he had been healthy as a horse just days before." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. A suspicious death following questions about Alara's treatment was not proof of conspiracy, but it established a pattern. Someone powerful enough to arrange convenient accidents. Someone with access to castle operations and the authority to suppress investigations. Someone who had been steadily consolidating power for 3 years, while he, blind fool that he was, had praised her efficiency and trusted her loyalty. "Double the watch on Alara," he commanded. "I want eyes on her at all times, but discreet. If Mordana suspects surveillance, she may accelerate whatever plans she has. And Theron, I want deep background on the Chancellor, family connections, financial records, correspondence with outside parties. If there is a conspiracy here, we need to understand its full scope before taking action." The following week brought a cold autumn rain that drummed against diamond-paned windows while Marcus conducted his duties and waited for more intelligence. Each day brought new observations that fed his growing certainty. Each night brought dreams of those distinctive eyes and a mate bond trying desperately to form across whatever barrier kept them separated. His wolf was becoming harder to control, the protective instinct building to levels he had not experienced since his first mate's death. It was on the 7th day, as weak morning sunshine broke through retreating storm clouds, that everything changed. Marcus had risen early to walk the castle's lesser-used corridors, paths where servants often worked without awareness of royal presence. It was in one such passage, lined with tapestries depicting ancient pack victories, that he encountered Alara alone. She carried fresh linens for the guest chambers, moving with that same efficient grace despite the heavy burden. The bundle shifted unexpectedly in her arms. She adjusted her grip to prevent dropping the load, and as she did, her right sleeve pulled back several inches. In the clear morning light streaming through a nearby window, Marcus saw what had been carefully hidden. Her forearm was covered in scars, small, round, perfectly circular marks that could only come from one source: silver burns. Dozens of them, arranged in patterns that were clearly deliberate, precisely placed, methodically inflicted over extended time. Silver was toxic to werewolves, burning their supernatural flesh like acid, leaving scars that never fully healed. The pain of silver contact was excruciating beyond human comprehension, and the damage took weeks or months to recover from completely. These scars represented years of systematic torture, using the one substance guaranteed to cause maximum agony to their kind. But she should not have survived such treatment. Normal wolves died from silver poisoning with far less exposure. The fact that she was standing here, functional, able to work despite carrying evidence of sustained silver torture, meant one of two things. Either she had no wolf at all and was fully human, which would explain her survival but contradict his wolf's insistence that she was mate. Or she did have a wolf, one powerful enough to survive what should have been fatal, but suppressed so completely that even its healing abilities were locked away. Marcus found himself moving before conscious thought, crossing the corridor to catch her wrist gently as she noticed his presence and started to pull the sleeve back down. She froze like a rabbit in a snare, her eyes going wide with a fear so profound it made his chest ache. "How did you get these?" His voice came out rougher than intended, alpha authority mixing with barely controlled fury. Alara tried to yank her arm back, but his grip, though gentle, was implacable. "I am clumsy around the forge, Alpha King. Silver tools and careless hands." The lie was smooth, rehearsed, delivered with the conviction of someone who had told it many times before. But forge work happened in the East Wing's armory, and household servants never had reason to be there. The excuse was transparently false, yet offered with the desperate hope that he would accept it and allow her to escape this uncomfortable interrogation. "Silver forges are in the East Wing," Marcus said carefully, forcing his voice to remain calm despite his wolf's howling rage. "You work in the castle proper. Try again." Her breathing quickened, panic rising in her expression. "Chancellor Mordana has been patient teaching me to be more careful. The lessons are effective. Please, Alpha King, I must deliver these linens." Lessons. With silver heated to burning temperature, applied in runic patterns that would kill any normal wolf. Marcus studied the scars more closely, recognizing now what he had missed in his initial shock. They were not random. They formed symbols, old pack runes used in ancient rituals, binding marks, suppression seals, the kind of dark magic that had been forbidden for generations because of its cruelty and effectiveness. "Lessons," he repeated softly, his eyes flashing gold briefly. "With silver heated to burning temperature, applied in runic patterns that would kill any normal wolf." She went absolutely still, the kind of frozen shock that came from having carefully guarded secrets suddenly exposed. For a moment, raw terror showed in her face, quickly followed by resignation. She expected punishment now, expected that this discovery would somehow make her situation worse. "I am not a wolf, Alpha King," she whispered, the words clearly rehearsed like catechism. "The massacre took that from me." "Wolves do not disappear," Marcus said, his thumb gentle against the scarred skin of her wrist. His wolf was pushing so close to the surface that he could feel fur trying to emerge along his shoulders. "They hide when survival demands it. Someone has been keeping yours caged." She began reciting then, words spilling out in desperate litany. "I deserve correction for my flaws. Pride, disobedience, inappropriate thoughts. Chancellor Mordana helps me remember my place. She is patient with my failures. I am grateful for her guidance." Each word was designed to protect her abuser while accepting responsibility for her own torture. It was a masterwork of psychological conditioning, teaching the victim to defend their tormentor, to frame systematic abuse as deserved correction, to express gratitude for the very cruelty that destroyed them. Marcus had seen such conditioning in prisoners of war, captives broken so thoroughly that they could no longer recognize their own victimization. But her eyes told a different story. For just a moment, as she spoke those rehearsed justifications, her irises flashed gold at the edges. Just a flicker, barely visible, gone almost before he registered it. But it was there. Proof that somewhere deep inside, buried under years of trauma and dark magic and psychological torture, a wolf still lived. His mate's wolf. An Omega's power, locked away by silver and cruelty and fear. Marcus released her wrist carefully, watching her clutch the linens against her chest like a shield. "Go," he said softly. "Deliver your burden. But Alara, know this. You are not broken. You are not deserving of cruelty, and you are not alone anymore." She fled then, hurrying away down the corridor with the desperation of someone who had just realized that the careful lies protecting her existence had been shattered. Marcus stood in the empty passage, his hands clenched into fists, his wolf howling for blood. He had found his mate, he had found an Omega, and he had discovered systematic torture happening in his own castle, perpetrated by his most trusted advisor, hidden for years while he remained obliviously satisfied with his efficient administration. The investigation could no longer remain discreet. The evidence was mounting. The pattern was clear. High Chancellor Mordanna Blackthorne was not simply a sadistic superior. She was something far darker. Someone who knew enough about wolves and pack magic and ancient rituals to suppress an Omega for 8 years without killing her. Someone with the power to arrange convenient deaths for anyone who asked too many questions. Someone who had spent 3 years carefully positioning herself at the center of his government while conducting atrocities in the shadows. Marcus made his way to his private study, where Theron waited with the latest intelligence. What his beta reported confirmed his worst fears, while adding layers of conspiracy that reached far beyond personal cruelty into existential threat. Mordanna had been meeting with someone at the border, a vampire, based on tracks and scent markers. Prince Constantine of Bloodmere, the ancient vampire lord who ruled the territories to the east, vampires who had not been active near Shadow Peak since the truce established 20 years ago, unless the truce was breaking, unless old enemies were gathering for new war, unless an Omega's suppression and a kingdom's weakening were connected pieces of a much larger plan. Father Aldrich arrived next, the aging priest who kept the castle's archives and studied ancient texts that most considered irrelevant historical curiosities. But those texts held knowledge that had been forgotten, prophecies that had been dismissed, warnings that no one heeded until crisis forced remembrance. The Moonwhisper Pack was not simply massacred for territory, the old priest said gravely, spreading aged parchments across Marcus's desk. They were targeted specifically because they were the last Omega bloodline. Wolves who could influence even alphas, who balanced pack dynamics and prevented tyranny through empathic connection. Their distinctive eyes marked them as keepers of old magic, the kind that made them valuable beyond measure and vulnerable beyond calculation. And someone wanted them eliminated, Marcus concluded, pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. But they failed. One survived, hidden among refugees, labeled as broken, suppressed before her power could manifest and draw attention. "If she is truly Omega," Father Aldrich continued, his voice heavy with foreboding, "then her existence carries implications beyond her personal welfare. The old texts speak of prophecies tied to the last Omega bloodline. Her awakening could shift power structures across all supernatural realms. Her death or permanent breaking would have opposite effect, shattering pack bonds and leaving kingdoms vulnerable to external threats." Theron placed another document on the desk, this one a translated letter intercepted from Mordanna's private correspondence. The language was coded, but the message was clear enough. Prince Constantine was waiting for signal that the Omega was broken or dead. Then invasion forces would move, taking advantage of the weakened pack bonds and internal disorder that would follow. Morgana's role was to ensure that critical moment came to pass while simultaneously weakening castle defenses and corrupting loyal nobles. It was a brilliant strategy. Use personal cruelty to serve military objectives. Break the kingdom's spiritual foundation while compromising its political structure. Then strike when both were weakest, overwhelming defenses before anyone realized the seemingly unconnected problems were coordinated attacks. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked, his voice deadly calm despite the rage building inside him. "Days at most," Theron replied. "The letters suggest timeline is accelerating. Morgana grows frustrated that Alara has not broken completely despite years of torture. The vampire prince grows impatient waiting for his signal. If they perceive that discovery is imminent, they may act precipitously." Marcus stood, moving to the window that overlooked his kingdom, the lands he had sworn to protect, the wolves whose welfare was his sacred responsibility. Somewhere out there in the castle below, his mate was suffering. His Omega was caged. The key to his kingdom's survival was being systematically destroyed by traitors within, while enemies gathered without. And he had been blind to it all, praising efficiency while atrocities happened in the shadows. No more. "Gather the wolves we trust absolutely," he commanded, alpha authority ringing in his voice. "Theron, Father Aldrich, Maeve, Lord Garrett, anyone whose loyalty is beyond question. We meet tonight in the old chapel where walls prevent eavesdropping. It is time to bring everything into the light." His wolf settled slightly, sensing that action was finally coming. But the beast remained agitated, pacing, demanding that its mate be protected immediately. Marcus understood the instinct. Every fiber of his being wanted to charge to wherever Alara was, kill anyone who threatened her, and never let her out of his sight again. But he was Alpha King, not just wolf. He had to think beyond immediate instinct to long-term strategy. Moving too soon could trigger the very catastrophe they needed to prevent. Moving too late could cost his mate her life. The balance between caution and action had never felt so precarious. But as afternoon faded into evening and his trusted circle began gathering for the secret meeting that would change everything, Marcus made peace with the approaching storm. He had been patient king long enough. It was time to be protective alpha, regardless of what that transformation might cost. The old chapel stood in the eastern corner of Shadow Peak's grounds, a stone structure built 3 centuries past when the first Wolf Kings had claimed these mountains as their domain. Its walls were thick, designed to withstand siege warfare, and enchanted with ancient pack magic that prevented sound from escaping or outside ears from penetrating. It was here, in the cold shadow of history, that Marcus assembled the wolves he trusted with his kingdom's survival and his mate's life. They came in darkness, one by one, using passages and routes that would not draw attention. Captain Theron arrived first, his beta instincts already on high alert, scanning for threats that might compromise their gathering. Lord Garrett followed, the old warrior moving with surprising stealth despite his advanced years. Maeve Ironhearth slipped through the kitchen gardens, carrying the weight of knowledge she had kept silent too long. Father Aldrich emerged from the archives with arms full of ancient texts. Lady Isadora Silvercrest, wife of one of Morgana's supposed allies, arrived last, her face pale with the risk she was taking by choosing loyalty to truth over loyalty to her husband's political faction. Marcus stood before them in the chapel's dim candlelight, no longer just their king, but their alpha in the most primal sense. His wolf was close to the surface, lending power to his presence, making the air thick with dominance that demanded attention and obedience. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in the bones of every wolf present. "What I share tonight cannot leave this room," he began. "Lives depend on your discretion. The kingdom itself hangs in balance. Each of you has been chosen because your loyalty has been proven beyond question, and because you have knowledge or resources necessary to prevent catastrophe." He told them everything. The servant with distinctive eyes, who was no servant at all but the last Moonwhisper survivor. The mate bond his wolf recognized despite her suppressed nature. The silver burn scars arranged in binding runes. The suspicious death of Captain Davith, and others who had asked dangerous questions. The intercepted letters suggesting conspiracy between High Chancellor Morgana and Vampire Prince Constantine. The prophecies linking Omega survival to pack stability and kingdom defense. The assembled wolves listened in shocked silence as the scope of the conspiracy unfolded. What they had perhaps suspected individually, isolated concerns about strange coincidences or troubling patterns, suddenly cohered into a picture of coordinated evil operating at the highest levels of government. "I have failed in my most basic duty as Alpha," Marcus said, his voice rough with self-condemnation. "To protect those who cannot protect themselves, to see threats before they metastasize, to ensure that power serves justice rather than enabling cruelty. That failure ends tonight. But the path forward requires careful planning. We face enemies both within and without. Move too hastily, and we trigger premature conflict we may not survive. Move too slowly, and we lose the one person whose survival is key to everything else." Maeve spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of age and accumulated wisdom. "The girl must be protected immediately, Alpha King. I have watched her fade these past 3 years under Morgana's control. Whatever dark magic suppresses her wolf grows stronger while she grows weaker. If we delay much longer, there may be nothing left to save." "I concur," Father Aldrich added, spreading his ancient texts across a stone altar. "The binding runes Lord Marcus described are blood magic of the darkest sort. They do not simply suppress the wolf, they feed on it, slowly devouring the victim's supernatural essence to fuel their own power. Morgana has likely been growing stronger while Alara weakens. In another few months, the process becomes irreversible. The girl will die, and her power will be permanently absorbed by whoever placed the bindings." Marcus felt his wolf surge forward at that revelation, barely maintaining human form as protective fury threatened to overwhelm rational thought. His mate was not just being tortured. She was being consumed, her very essence stolen piece by piece to feed her abuser's dark ambitions. Lady Isadora produced papers from within her cloak, documents she had copied at great personal risk from her husband's correspondence. "There is more. Lord Blackstone and others in Morgana's circle have been receiving payments from Bloodmere territory. Gold, precious gems, promises of land and titles when the current regime falls. They believe they are positioning themselves to prosper under vampire rule, not understanding that Constantine sees them as useful fools to be discarded once their purpose is served." She spread the papers, showing dates and amounts that painted a damning picture of systematic bribery reaching deep into the noble houses. At least a third of Marcus's court was compromised, either through greed or blackmail or both. Morgana had spent years building a web of corruption and dependence, ensuring that when the moment came to strike, she would have allies throughout the kingdom to enable vampire invasion. "How do we counter this without triggering civil war?" Garrett asked, his strategic mind already calculating scenarios. "If we move against Morgana openly, her compromised nobles will cry political persecution. If we arrest them all at once, we weaken our own defenses and create the chaos that Constantine awaits. We need to neutralize the internal threat while preparing for external attack." Theron leaned forward, his beta instincts providing tactical insight. "We separate the problems. First, we secure Alara. Remove her from Morgana's control before the binding can consume her completely. Second, we gather irrefutable evidence of the conspiracy, not just intercepted letters, but proof that will convince even compromised nobles. Third, we prepare for vampire assault while publicly appearing to continue normal operations. Make Constantine believe his plan proceeds smoothly until we are ready to spring the trap." It was sound strategy, but Marcus felt his wolf's impatience. Every moment his mate remained under threat, the beast grew harder to control. The Alpha wanted to act now, to charge through the castle and rip Morgana apart with his bare claws. But the king understood that such impulsive action would doom everything. They needed to be smarter than their enemies, more patient, more ruthless in execution when the moment finally came. "There is one additional complication," Father Aldrich said gravely. "If Alara truly is Omega, and if the binding breaks suddenly through trauma or force, her awakening will be violent. Omega power suppressed for 8 years will not emerge gently. She could inadvertently harm herself or others through sheer psychic backlash. Ideally, the binding should be dissolved carefully, with preparation and support systems in place." "We may not have time for ideal circumstances," Marcus replied. "If Morgana suspects discovery is imminent, she may accelerate her timeline. Kill Ilara and trigger Constantine's invasion simultaneously. We operate under assumption that we have days at most, perhaps only hours." The weight of that timeline settled over them like winter frost. Days to dismantle years of conspiracy. Hours to save a mate whose survival determined kingdom survival. The margin for error was non-existent. They planned deep into the night, assigning roles and contingencies, preparing for multiple scenarios. Theron would increase security around key positions while appearing to maintain normal operations. Garrett would quietly mobilize veteran fighters he trusted, positioning them for rapid deployment. Maeve would prepare healing resources for Alara's recovery, gathering herbs and medicines that could counteract dark magic poisoning. Father Aldrich would research methods for safely breaking binding runes without killing the victim. Lady Isadora would continue gathering evidence while feeding false information to her husband's faction, making Morgana believe her plans remained secret. And Marcus himself would maintain the appearance of oblivious routine while his wolf howled for action. It was perhaps the hardest role, requiring him to smile and nod and conduct business as usual while knowing that his mate suffered just corridors away. But if he showed his hand too early, if Morgana realized that her game was exposed, she would strike immediately with whatever resources she had positioned. Better to let her believe in continued success while they maneuvered pieces into place. As the meeting dissolved and conspirators slipped away through darkness, Marcus remained alone in the ancient chapel. His hands gripped the stone altar until his knuckles went white, his wolf pressing so close to the surface that his vision flickered between human sight and lupine perception. The bond with Alara pulled at him like a physical tether, some part of his soul recognizing its other half and straining desperately to reach her across whatever barriers kept them separated. He had been a good king, he thought, fair in judgment, strong in defense, wise in governance. He had built alliances, maintained peace, protected his people from external threats. But he had failed to see the rot within his own walls, had praised efficiency while torture happened in the shadows, had trusted political skills while darkness consolidated power, and now his mate paid the price for his blindness. That ended tonight. Whatever came next, whatever the cost, he would not fail her again. The following morning brought a summons that Marcus had been expecting yet dreading. An emergency assembly of nobles, called by Lord Blackstone and his faction, requiring the king's immediate attendance to address matters critical to kingdom security. The trap was being sprung, though Marcus suspected Morgana did not yet realize that her prey was aware of the snare. He entered the great hall to find it filled with nobles whose expressions ranged from genuine concern to calculating ambition. The room was divided clearly now that he knew what to look for. On one side, those loyal to crown and kingdom. On the other, those compromised by Morgana's gold and promises. In the center, those who waited to see which way power would flow before committing themselves. Lord Blackstone stood before the assembled court with documents that allegedly proved Kieran's unfitness to rule. "Alpha King Marcus, we have gathered because disturbing reports require immediate attention. Reports that question your judgment and threaten kingdom stability during these dangerous times." The formal accusation had begun. Marcus took his throne with deliberate calm, projecting the authority of 8 years' reign while his wolf snarled beneath the surface. "Speak plainly, Lord Blackstone. What concerns bring you before me with such urgency?" "Your obsession with a common servant," Blackstone declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Multiple witnesses report that you have taken unusual interest in household staff, conducting investigations into domestic matters while neglecting critical security issues. Prince Constantine's forces mass at our borders. Vampire scouts have been sighted in territories we patrol, yet you concern yourself with the welfare of a single orphan girl." Murmurs ran through the assembly, some surprised, some knowing, all aware that they were witnessing a direct challenge to royal authority. This was the opening move in Morgana's endgame, using political theater to undermine Marcus's credibility before moving to more direct action. "I concern myself with justice," Marcus replied, his voice carrying alpha harmonics that made several wolves in the audience flinch. "As any king worthy of the title must do. Are you suggesting that protecting the vulnerable is somehow incompatible with defending our borders?" "I suggest," Blackstone pressed, "that emotional entanglement with a servant demonstrates weakness that our enemies will exploit. That personal sentiment must not override strategic necessity. That during times of crisis, a king must focus on genuine threats rather than domestic trivialities." The argument was crafted to appeal to traditional wolf values: strength over sentiment, pack survival over individual welfare, the greater good justifying the sacrifice of lesser members. It was exactly the kind of reasoning that allowed systematic abuse to flourish in darkness while everyone looked the other way. Before Marcus could respond, the side doors opened and Morgana entered with Alara following behind. The girl was transformed in ways that made Marcus's blood run cold. She wore fine clothes now, not the rough gray wool of servants. Her hair was arranged in elaborate style beneath a small circlet. She moved with confidence and poise, no longer the frightened victim, but a composed courtier. And when she looked at Marcus across the hall, her expression held no recognition, no fear, nothing but cool professional distance. His wolf went wild, howling, raging, demanding to know what had been done to their mate. Because this was not healing. This was not recovery. This was something far darker, some final layer of the conspiracy that he had not anticipated. "Honored assembly," Morgana said, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. "I present evidence that will clarify the situation and demonstrate why Lord Blackstone's concerns are tragically justified." She guided Alara to the center of the hall, positioning her like a puppet on display. The girl stood with perfect posture, hands clasped, expression neutral. Everything about her screamed wrong to Marcus's senses. This was not his mate. Not the frightened but dignified woman who had fled from him in the corridor. This was a shell, a performance, a final cruelty designed to break his heart while destroying his credibility. "Tell them," Morgana commanded softly. Alara curtsied to the assembly with flawless grace. When she spoke, her voice was cultured, educated, nothing like the terrified whispers Marcus had heard before. "Honored nobles, I must confess deception that has caused unnecessary turmoil. I am not Alara, orphaned servant of this house. I am Seraphina Darkwater, agent of Prince Constantine, sent 3 years ago to create exactly this division within your court." The hall erupted in shocked exclamations. Marcus felt his world tilt as the implications crashed over him. She was claiming to be a vampire agent, claiming the abuse, the fear, the helplessness had all been performance, claiming that his wolf's recognition of mate bond was manufactured deception designed to manipulate him. "The burns, the fear, the alleged abuse," the woman claiming to be Seraphina continued. "All elements of my mission. Create a victim whose suffering would distract your king while real threats gathered. Make the Alpha question his own court, his most trusted advisors, his understanding of friend and foe. The strategy has worked beyond our expectations." She gestured to herself, indicating the transformation. "Chancellor Morgana discovered my true nature weeks ago and has been working with me to expose the deception before more damage could be done. The king's obsession with my supposed welfare has left him blind to actual danger. His emotional weakness has compromised his judgment exactly as Prince Constantine predicted. Documents were presented as evidence. Letters supposedly from Constantine detailing the infiltration plan. Testimony from servants who claimed they had seen her practicing her frightened victim act. Even fake credentials identifying her as Bloodmere operative. It was a masterwork of manufactured proof, each piece reinforcing the narrative that Marcus had been fooled by sophisticated foreign agent. His wolf was howling, not with rage, but with confusion and pain. The mate bond insisted that she was real, that the connection between them was genuine, but the evidence before him suggested elaborate deception. His rational mind warred with primal instinct, unable to reconcile what he knew against what he saw. "You see now," Lord Blackstone addressed the assembly, "why we must act decisively. Our king has been compromised through emotional manipulation. He cannot be trusted to defend the kingdom when he cannot even identify enemies within his own household." The political trap was complete. If Marcus defended Alara, he appeared delusional, unable to accept that he had been deceived. If he accepted the evidence, he admitted to judgment so poor that his fitness to rule came into question. Either path led to exactly what Mordanna wanted, his authority undermined and legitimacy questioned, while external threats prepared to strike. A vote was called: restore full authority to Chancellor Mordanna and her advisors to handle the crisis, imprison the vampire agent, and investigate the full extent of her infiltration, allow the king to focus on border defense while capable administrators managed internal security. It was phrased as support for Marcus, giving him time to recover from this manipulation, but the subtext was clear. They were stripping his actual power while maintaining the fiction of his title. The vote proceeded with grim inevitability. Those compromised by Mordanna's gold voted yes immediately. Those uncertain saw apparent evidence and logic in the proposal. Even some loyal wolves, genuinely concerned about vampire threats and seeing what appeared to be clear proof of infiltration, voted to support emergency measures. The motion passed. Alara, or Seraphina, or whoever she truly was taken away in chains. Mordanna was granted expanded authority to root out additional infiltrators and coordinate defense preparations, and Marcus sat on his throne, silent and still, while his kingdom was stolen in broad daylight through legal mechanisms and manufactured crisis. But those watching closely would have seen something they might have found concerning. Marcus's eyes had gone completely gold. Not the normal flash of wolf rising, but sustained transformation that indicated his beast was no longer content to remain caged. His hands gripped the throne's armrests with enough force to crack wood, and the temperature in the hall had dropped perceptibly, as if his fury was cold enough to chill the very air. When the assembly finally adjourned, after Mordanna had issued a stream of commands about security protocols and investigation procedures, Marcus remained seated. Nobles filed out, some satisfied with their political victory, others troubled by what they had witnessed but uncertain what alternative existed. Theron approached the throne cautiously, his beta instincts warning him that his alpha was in dangerous state. "My king," he said quietly, "we must maintain the appearance of cooperation. If you react now, while they hold all the political leverage, we lose any chance to counter their plans." Marcus's voice, when he finally spoke, carried harmonics so deep they resonated in the stone itself. "She is my mate. My wolf knows her. The bond tries to form despite whatever they have done to her, and I just sat here and watched them take her away to be executed as a spy." "Not executed," Theron said urgently. "Imprisoned pending investigation. That gives us time. They need to maintain the appearance of proper procedure. And Alpha, think strategically." If she truly was a vampire agent, why would Constantine expend such a valuable operative merely to undermine one king? The deception goes deeper. They are using her against you, but not in the way they claim. Logic slowly penetrated the red haze of protective fury. Theron was right. The entire performance felt wrong. Not because he could not believe vampire agents existed or that infiltration was impossible, but because the supposed evidence was too convenient, the timing too coordinated, and Alara's transformation too complete. This was not exposure of an enemy agent. This was the final phase of breaking his mate while destroying his ability to save her. "Where have they taken her?" Marcus asked, forcing his voice back toward something approaching human control. "The Silverwood Tower," Theron replied grimly. "Ostensibly because it is most secure location for high-value prisoner, but the tower's walls are infused with silver, preventing wolves from shifting. If she truly has suppressed wolf, as we believe, then placing her there is tantamount to slow execution. The silver in the walls will poison her even without direct contact." Silverwood Tower, built centuries ago as facility for containing rogue wolves too dangerous to be allowed freedom but too valuable to simply kill. Its walls were impregnated with powdered silver mixed into the mortar, creating constant low-level exposure that prevented transformation and slowly sapped supernatural strength. A normal wolf could survive perhaps a week in such environment. Someone already weakened by years of binding and torture would last days at best, and Mordanna knew this. Everyone with knowledge of castle history knew this, which meant the imprisonment was not about investigation or security. It was about killing Ilara slowly while maintaining plausible deniability. She would simply weaken and die, and they could claim it was unfortunate consequence of necessary security measures. No one could prove otherwise. No one could challenge it without evidence. And by the time anyone moved to intervene through proper channels, she would be gone. Marcus stood abruptly, the movement so sudden that Theron stepped back on instinct. "Gather everyone. Everyone we trust. Meet in the old chapel at midnight. We are done with patience and political maneuvering. If they want war, they will have it. But first, we rescue my mate from the trap they have built for her. Alpha, if we move openly against Mordanna now, before we have exposed the full conspiracy, we risk civil war that will leave us vulnerable to vampire invasion," Theron warned. "Then we move quickly enough that civil war becomes irrelevant," Marcus replied, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "We secure Ilara. We gather the evidence Isadora has collected. We present it to the court in a manner that cannot be disputed or dismissed. And we do it all before Constantine realizes his plan has failed and launches his attack anyway." That is an extremely narrow window for success. I am aware, but I have been a diplomatic king for 8 years. Tonight, I will be what I should have been from the beginning: a wolf protecting his mate, an alpha defending his pack, and a warrior who shows no mercy to those who threaten what is mine. The rest of the day passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Marcus conducted business as expected, meeting with advisors and approving documents while his mind raced through tactical scenarios. Mordanna appeared at regular intervals, solicitous and concerned, playing the role of devoted chancellor supporting her king through difficult circumstances. Each time she spoke, Marcus's wolf snarled with barely suppressed violence, but he maintained control, let her believe her performance was successful, gave no indication that he understood the full depth of her betrayal. As evening fell and the castle settled into its nighttime rhythms, Marcus retreated to his private chambers. But he did not prepare for sleep. Instead, he donned armor, not the ceremonial plate worn for state occasions, but the battle-scarred leather and steel of a warrior preparing for actual combat. His weapons were selected with care: silver-blessed blade that could cut through dark magic, claws reinforced with moonstone that would tear through vampire flesh, and most importantly, the absolute conviction that nothing would prevent him from reaching his mate. Theron arrived with the strike team, 12 wolves hand-selected for loyalty and combat prowess. They had fought together through the border wars, trusted each other with their lives, and understood that tonight's mission would determine kingdom survival. Garrett was there, old but still deadly, carrying the wisdom of 50 years' combat experience. 6 more veteran fighters who had proven themselves in fire and blood. And Theron himself, the beta, whose tactical brilliance had saved them in dozens of impossible situations. The Silverwood Tower is defended by 8 mercenaries and 6 compromised guards, Theron reported quietly. Mercenaries are vampire thralls, humans given enhanced strength and speed in exchange for blood service. Guards are wolves whose loyalty Mordanna has purchased through gold or blackmail. All have been told that any rescue attempt proves your madness and justifies lethal force to prevent escape of a dangerous prisoner. "How are they positioned?" Marcus asked, his mind already calculating approach vectors and engagement sequences. Theron spread a crude map showing the tower's layout and surrounding grounds. 4 mercenaries at the main entrance, 2 each on north and south approaches. Guards patrol the perimeter in pairs. Inside, we believe Ilara is held in the upper chamber, while additional prisoners, likely the hostages they are using to ensure her cooperation, are in the lower levels. Hostages. Of course. Morgana would not rely solely on psychological conditioning. She would have leverage, innocent people whose lives depended on Alara's compliance. Maeve, perhaps. Father Aldrich. Others who had shown her kindness and could be used to ensure she played her assigned role in this deadly theater. We split into 3 teams, Marcus decided. Theron, you lead the primary assault on the main entrance. Make it loud and obvious. Draw their attention and resources. Garrett, take 4 wolves around the north approach. Your job is hostage extraction from the lower levels. Move fast once the distraction begins. I will take the south approach alone and reach Alara in the upper chamber. Alone? Theron questioned. Alpha, that is unnecessarily risky. It is necessary precisely because it is risky, Marcus replied. If I am leading assault on the main gate, they will concentrate forces there and potentially harm prisoners before we can reach them. If I am part of hostage extraction, they might execute Alara rather than allow rescue. But if I approach alone through their weakest point while they are distracted, I can reach her before they realize the true target. And once I have her, once the mate bond is secured, my wolf will be strong enough to handle whatever comes next. He did not mention the other reason. The Protector's fury that his wolf kept straining toward, that legendary state where alpha defending mate transcended normal limitations. He could feel it building, pressing against the restraints of conscious control. When he finally saw Alara again, when he confirmed with his own eyes that she was real and suffering in his, the fury would break free. And he needed to be alone when that happened, because he could not guarantee control over who got caught in the resulting violence. They moved through darkness, using paths and shadows that would keep them hidden until the moment came to strike. The night was cold and clear, moonlight silver on frost-touched grass. Perfect conditions for wolf senses, for tracking and hunting and warfare. The strike team flowed like water through familiar terrain, each member knowing their role and trusting their packmates to execute their own. As they approached the tower, Marcus split off from the main group. He circled wide through the gardens, using topography and vegetation to mask his presence. From his position, he could see the tower rising against the star-filled sky, stone walls 3 stories high, narrow windows that would prevent easy access, and that terrible silver-impregnated mortar that gave the structure its name. Even from this distance he could smell it, the acrid tang of silver that made his wolf recoil instinctively. Somewhere inside those walls, his mate was dying. He could feel it through the bond trying desperately to form, a wrongness that went beyond physical pain into spiritual erosion. The binding runes were consuming her, and the silver in the walls was accelerating the process. Hours, Maeve had said, maybe less. They had perhaps until dawn before the damage became irreversible. Theron's team hit the main entrance with explosive violence. The sound of combat erupted in the night, snarls and shouts and the clash of steel on steel. Exactly as planned, the mercenaries and guards rushed toward the obvious threat, leaving the south approach temporarily undermanned. Marcus moved then, covering the open ground with supernatural speed, hitting the single remaining guard with enough force to knock him unconscious before the man could raise alarm. The tower door was locked, but not reinforced. A single kick from alpha-enhanced strength tore it off its hinges. Marcus entered the darkness beyond, his wolf vision showing him the narrow staircase spiraling upward. He took the steps 3 at a time, following his senses more than sight, letting the mate bond pull him toward where she was held. He was halfway up when he heard voices from above, Morgana's cultured tones, discussing something with another speaker whose accent marked him as foreign. Vampire. Prince Constantine, or one of his lieutenants, here personally to ensure their plan proceeded smoothly. The confirmation of vampire involvement, the direct evidence they would need, but Marcus found he no longer cared about proof or politics. All that mattered was reaching Alara before they could harm her further. The voices grew clearer as he approached the upper chamber, and what he heard made his blood turn to ice in his veins. "Why does Lord Constantine want her dead if she is so valuable?" Morgana was asking. "Not dead," the vampire replied. "Broken. A broken Omega can be turned, transformed into vampire while retaining her supernatural gifts. She would still carry the empathic abilities, the pack-bonding power, but serve our prince rather than her own kind. Imagine, Chancellor, an Omega vampire who could infiltrate wolf packs, create false bonds, deliver entire kingdoms to us without a single battle. And my payment for facilitating this? You will rule what remains of Shadowpeak as our puppet. All we require is one moment when her wolf finally emerges. The awakening is when Omegas are most vulnerable. We will strike then, capture rather than kill, and your part in this grand design will be complete. She is beginning to shift now, Morgana said with satisfaction. The full moon, her supposed mate nearby, trauma breaking through the binding. Perfect storm. Another hour and transformation begins. Then we take her, and everything we have worked toward comes to fruition. Marcus heard enough. They were not just planning to kill Alara. They intended to transform her into vampire, corrupt her Omega gifts, turn her into weapon against her own kind. And they were waiting for her wolf to emerge, for the awakening that would make her vulnerable before striking, which meant he had less than an hour to reach her, protect her through the most dangerous moment of her life, and somehow prevent the entire plot from succeeding. He stopped trying to be stealthy. Speed mattered more now than surprise. He charged up the remaining stairs, his wolf surging so close to the surface that fur rippled across his shoulders and his vision bled fully into gold. The door to the upper chamber was reinforced, barred from within, but alpha strength enhanced by protective fury meant that wood and iron were meaningless obstacles. He hit it with his shoulder, and the entire doorframe exploded inward in a shower of splinters and twisted metal. The scene that greeted him would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. Alara was chained to a wooden frame in the center of the room, her back exposed and marked with fresh silver burns that bled freely. The binding runes glowed with sickly purple light, drinking her essence even as they kept her wolf caged. Morgana stood over her with a heated brand, clearly in the process of adding new marks to old scars. And beside the Chancellor stood a vampire in elegant court dress, his pale features showing surprise at the interruption, but no fear. For one frozen moment, everyone simply stared. Then Marcus's wolf, held back too long and pushed too far, exploded outward with a roar that shook the tower's foundations and announced to everyone within a mile that an alpha had found his mate in mortal danger and would accept no barriers between them. The Protector's fury had awakened. The transformation that swept through Marcus Ironwood was unlike anything witnessed in 3 generations of Wolf Kings. The Protector's fury was more than simple rage, more than the battle madness that could overtake any alpha in combat. It was the manifestation of primal law, the universe's response when an alpha found his mate in mortal peril and every instinct demanded immediate, overwhelming action. His eyes blazed not gold, but silver white, as if the moon goddess herself had reached down to lend power to her chosen defender. Fur erupted across his skin in waves of silver black, but he did not complete the full shift into wolf form. Instead, he locked halfway, becoming something that should not exist according to natural law. Bipedal, but covered in thick fur. Human intelligence merged with lupine instinct, claws like daggers extending from fingers that retained enough dexterity to wield weapons, fangs that could tear through steel, and strength multiplied tenfold beyond even his normal alpha capabilities. The roar that tore from his throat contained harmonics that resonated in the bones of every wolf within the castle. It was command and challenge and promise all woven together. Command to his pack that their alpha protected what was his. Challenge to any who would stand between him and his mate. Promise that those who had caused her suffering would face judgment without mercy or hesitation. The vampire lieutenant moved first, his supernatural speed allowing him to cross the chamber in a blur. But the Protector's fury made Marcus faster. He caught the vampire's arm mid-strike, his clawed hand closing like a vice around pale flesh. The lieutenant's eyes went wide with shock as he realized the creature he faced was not bound by normal wolf limitations. Marcus twisted, using the vampire's own momentum against him, and threw the undead warrior through the stone wall hard enough to crack the silver-infused mortar. Morgana recovered from her shock and launched dark magic, shadow tendrils erupting from her hands to wrap around Marcus's throat. The magic that should have choked him, that would have incapacitated any normal wolf, simply burned away against the silver-white aura that surrounded his fury-enhanced form. She stumbled backward, genuine fear showing on her features for the first time. "You should have stayed a diplomat, Alpha King," she hissed, gathering more power. "Warriors are so predictable, so easily manipulated through their emotions." Marcus spoke, and his voice carried wolf harmonics layered so deep they seemed to come from the earth itself. "You touched what is mine. You broke what I was meant to protect. There is no diplomacy here, only judgment." He moved toward her with deliberate intent, not rushed or frantic, but inexorable as winter's approach. Mordanna threw everything she had at him, shadow blades that should have cut through armor, binding spells that should have frozen him in place, psychic attacks that should have shattered his mind. Each assault simply broke against the fury of an alpha defending his mate, the most fundamental force in wolf nature. She backed toward the window, trapped between the advancing king and a 3-story drop to the courtyard below. Her confidence, her carefully maintained superiority, all of it stripped away to reveal the fear beneath. "This isn't possible," she gasped. "Protector's fury is myth. It hasn't manifested in 300 years. "Then you should feel honored," Marcus growled, his clawed hand catching her by the throat and lifting her off her feet. "You get to be the first in 3 centuries to experience what happens when someone tortures an alpha's mate." The vampire lieutenant recovered, pulling himself from the rubble of the shattered wall. Blood ran from a dozen wounds, but the undead healed quickly. He drew a silver blade, longer and more wicked than any normal sword, clearly designed for killing wolves. "Lord Constantine will not be pleased that I lost the Omega," he said with cold amusement, "but perhaps delivering the corpse of an Alpha King will compensate for the failure." He attacked with the refined technique of 8 centuries of combat experience. The blade moved in patterns designed to exploit wolf physiology, striking at joints and tendons with surgical precision. Any normal wolf would have been overwhelmed. But Marcus fought with the combined advantage of human tactical thinking and lupine instinct, each complementing the other. He saw the vampire's patterns, predicted the strikes, and turned them aside with armored forearms while his claws found openings in the ancient warrior's defense. They crashed through what remained of the chamber's furnishings, their combat shaking the entire tower. The vampire was fast and experienced and deadly. But Marcus fought with the strength of mate bond driving him forward, the absolute conviction that failure meant losing the one thing in all the world that mattered, and that conviction made him unstoppable. He caught the vampire's sword arm, twisted until bone cracked, and drove his claws into the undead chest with enough force to pierce through to the spine. The lieutenant gasped, blood frothing at his lips. "Tell Constantine," Marcus snarled into the dying vampire's face, "that if he wants war, he will have it. But if he ever touches her again, I will kill every vampire in Bloodmere with my bare hands and mount his head on my throne." He threw the vampire through the window. The creature's body tumbled through open air, trailing smoke as moonlight burned undead flesh. It hit the courtyard below and did not rise. One threat eliminated. Mordanna took advantage of the distraction to pull a hidden silver dagger, the blade glowing with dark enchantments. She lunged not at Marcus, but at Alara, still chained and helpless. "If I cannot have the kingdom, neither can you." Marcus moved on pure instinct. He crossed the distance between them impossibly fast and intercepted the blade meant for his mate's heart. Silver pierced his shoulder, driving deep into muscle and bone. Agony exploded through him as the toxic metal entered his bloodstream, burning like acid through his veins. Silver poisoning in an alpha was a death sentence, the metal reacting catastrophically with supernatural blood to create systemic shutdown. But he did not stop. With the silver blade still embedded in his shoulder, he backhanded Mordanna with his clawed fist. The blow sent her crashing into the wall hard enough to crack stone. She slid down, coughing blood, her carefully arranged hair now matted with crimson. Her emerald eyes, which had once held such calculating intelligence, now showed only confusion at how completely her plans had fallen apart. "Fool," she managed to gasp. "You have doomed your kingdom. Constantine's army is already at the gates. Without me to negotiate, without the proper surrender protocols, he will slaughter everyone. All this death for one broken servant." Marcus knelt beside her, his wolf still raging but beginning to recede as the silver poisoning spread through his system. "Then we will fight. We will die standing if necessary, but we will do it free, not as your puppets dancing to vampire strings." He stood, leaving her to die slowly from internal injuries. She had minutes at best. Let her spend them contemplating the failure of her grand design. He had more important concerns. Alara hung in her chains, eyes wide with shock and pain. The binding runes still glowed on her skin, drinking her essence even as her wolf tried desperately to emerge in response to her mate's presence. The silver in the walls had poisoned her. The fresh burns were bleeding freely, and she was so thin that he could see every rib beneath pale skin. She had been dying slowly for years, and tonight had nearly pushed her past the point where even supernatural healing could restore her. "Ilara," he said softly, his voice returning to something approaching human tones as the fury began to recede. The silver poisoning was accelerating that process, forcing his wolf back as the toxic metals shut down his supernatural systems one by one. "I am here. You are safe now." "Marcus," she whispered, using his name for the first time. Not Alpha King or Lord or Master, but simply his name, recognition finally showing in her expression. "You came for me." "Always," he promised, working at the chains that held her. The silver burned his hands, but he ignored the pain, focusing only on freeing her from the restraints that had held her captive. "I will always come for you. No distance, no danger, no barrier will ever keep me from protecting what is mine." The chains fell away and she collapsed into his arms, her body giving out after being held upright only by iron restraints. He held her carefully, mindful of her injuries, and felt the mate bond surge forward with renewed intensity. His wolf howled in triumph, finally able to touch her, to scent her properly, to begin the connection that had been denied for so long. But something was wrong. The binding runes were reacting to the mate bond's formation. They glowed brighter, burning hotter, trying to consume her wolf completely before it could emerge and complete the connection. It was the final trap, the last cruel trick embedded in dark magic. When her wolf finally tried to awaken, the binding would devour it entirely, taking all her power in one catastrophic drain that would leave her hollow and broken beyond any hope of recovery. "The runes!" Father Aldrich's voice called from the doorway. The old priest had followed the sounds of combat up the tower stairs, and now stood with ancient texts clutched in his hands. "You must break them before the awakening completes, or they will consume her entirely." "How?" Marcus demanded, cradling his dying mate while the silver poisoning spread through his own veins. He could feel his strength fading, his vision blurring, his heart struggling to pump blood that was turning toxic with each passing moment. "Blood magic requires blood sacrifice to break," the priest explained urgently. "The life force that powers the runes must be replaced by equal measure. It should be done carefully, with preparation and ritual, but we have no time for such niceties. You must feed your own life energy into her, burning out the binding by overwhelming it with alpha power." "That will kill him," Theron protested, appearing behind Father Aldrich with blood on his armor and victory in his eyes. "Alpha, the main assault succeeded. We have secured the tower and rescued the hostages. But if you pour your life force into breaking dark magic while silver poisoning spreads through your system, you will not survive the process." Marcus looked down at Alara, her eyes fluttering closed as consciousness began to fade. He could feel her slipping away, the mate bond stretching thinner as the binding runes consumed what little remained of her wolf. She had survived 8 years of torture that would have broken anyone else, had maintained her sanity and her basic goodness despite systematic efforts to destroy both, had protected others even when she could not protect herself. She deserved to live more than anyone he had ever known, and he was already dying. The silver in his shoulder was spreading, shutting down his heart and lungs and brain with chemical efficiency. Minutes remained before organ failure became irreversible. He could spend those minutes trying to save himself, perhaps succeeding if they reached healers quickly enough, or he could spend them saving her, ensuring that her suffering finally ended and her tormentors' plans failed completely. It was not really a choice at all. "Tell me what to do," he said to Father Aldrich. The ritual was simple in concept, but agonizing in execution. Marcus placed his hands over the binding runes on Alara's exposed back, his palms covering the worst of the silver burns. He reached deep inside himself, past the rational mind and conscious thought, down to where his wolf lived and his alpha power resided. That wellspring of supernatural energy that allowed him to command packs, to enhance his strength, to maintain the bonds that held his kingdom together. He gathered it all and began to pour it into her. The runes resisted, trying to consume his energy as they had consumed hers for years. But alpha power was not meant to be caged or controlled. It was dominance made manifest, will given supernatural force. He pushed harder, burning through the dark magic with sheer, overwhelming strength, not dismantling the binding so much as shattering it through brute application of superior power. Alara screamed as the process tore through her. The binding had become part of her, woven into her very essence, and having it ripped out was like tearing away portions of her soul. But beneath the agony, Marcus could feel her wolf stirring, not the suppressed, half-dead thing that had been caged for 8 years, but something powerful and ancient and magnificent struggling to emerge. The binding shattered in a blast of light that threw everyone in the chamber backward. Marcus collapsed, his strength completely spent, the silver poisoning accelerating now that he had nothing left to fight it with. His vision dimmed to gray tunnels. His heartbeat slowed to irregular struggling. Death approached with gentle insistence, suggesting it was time to lay down the burden of kingship and crown and responsibility. But he held on long enough to see Alara's transformation. The wolf that had been caged for 8 years finally burst free in an eruption of silver-white light. Her body convulsed as the shift took her, and when it completed, she stood on 4 legs as the most beautiful wolf Marcus had ever seen. Silver-white fur that seemed to glow with inner radiance. Smaller than an alpha, but carrying power that made the air itself hum with potential. And her eyes, those remarkable eyes, blazed gold with wolf consciousness finally able to express itself. She was Omega, the rarest and most precious of all wolves, the last of the Moon Whisper bloodline, his mate. And she was magnificent. The newly emerged Omega turned to where Marcus lay dying, and instinct older than civilization took over. She understood without teaching that her alpha had sacrificed himself to save her, that he was dying from silver poisoning and supernatural exhaustion, that minutes remained before death claimed him permanently, and Omega gifts, the abilities that made her kind so rare and valuable, activated automatically in response to her mate's desperate need. She shifted back to human form, the transformation flowing easily now that the binding no longer suppressed it. Power radiated from her in waves that made even the stone walls seem to hum in resonance. She dropped to her knees beside Marcus and placed her hands on his chest, directly over his failing heart. Golden light poured from her palms, Omega healing given focus and intent. The silver poisoning in his blood began to reverse, not slowly or incrementally, but rapidly, dramatically, as her power identified the toxin and systematically purged it from his system. The wound in his shoulder closed, flesh knitting together and pushing the embedded blade out to clatter on the stone floor. His heart, which had been moments from final shutdown, strengthened and steadied. Color returned to his face. Breath came easier. But the healing took a toll on her. She was exhausted, starved, traumatized, freshly transformed after 8 years of suppression. Drawing on her power so extensively so quickly was dangerous, potentially fatal. Her own body began to weaken as she poured everything she had into saving him. Theron started forward to stop her, but Father Aldrich held him back. "The bond is forming," the old priest said quietly. "Alpha and Omega, the rarest of true matings. She heals him, and he strengthens her. They balance each other. To interrupt now might sever the bond permanently." So they watched as Alara used the last of her strength to ensure Marcus survived. When his eyes finally opened, clear and aware and free from Silver's taint, she collapsed across his chest. Unconscious but alive, her breathing steady, her wolf settled and content in ways it had not been for 8 years. Marcus, still weak but functional, wrapped his arms around her and held her close. The mate bond snapped fully into place between them, a connection so profound that he could feel her heartbeat as if it were his own. Relief flooded through him so intensely that tears escaped, despite his alpha control. She lived. She was free. She was his. Everything else could be managed, but those 3 truths were foundation enough to face whatever came next. "The hostages?" he asked Theron, his voice hoarse but steady. "Safe," his beta reported. Maeve and the others were held in the lower levels as leverage to ensure Alara's cooperation. We have them secured and are providing medical attention for their minor injuries. Mordanna? Dead. The internal injuries you inflicted proved fatal. The vampire lieutenant's body has been confirmed destroyed, though we should assume Constantine knows his agent fell and may accelerate his invasion plans. The court? In chaos. The sounds of battle in the tower, the death of the Chancellor, and your survival despite the political trap has thrown Mordanna's allies into confusion. Some are already claiming they were coerced. Others are preparing to flee. Lord Blackstone has asked for an emergency meeting to discuss terms of surrender. Marcus laughed, the sound rough but genuine. I am sure he has. Tell him I will grant him one mercy for his surrender, a quick death rather than slow one. The choice of method I leave to his preference. The castle spent the next 3 days in organized chaos as the conspiracy's full scope was finally exposed. Lady Isadora's collected evidence, combined with documents found in Mordanna's chambers, painted a damning picture of systematic corruption reaching deep into every level of government. Nobles who had been compromised through bribery or blackmail were given opportunity to confess and cooperate. Those who chose continued defiance were arrested and tried before military tribunal that showed little patience for traitors who had nearly delivered the kingdom to vampire conquest. Lord Blackstone chose poison over hanging, taking his own life in his cell rather than face public execution. Others followed his example. Some begged for mercy that was occasionally granted in exchange for testimony against higher-ranking conspirators. The purge was surgical and swift, removing the rot before it could spread further, while being careful not to punish the innocent or uncertain who had been caught up in plots they barely understood. But Marcus's primary focus remained on Alara's recovery. She was installed in the royal chambers under heavy guard with Maeve and Dr. Helena Ravencroft attending to her physical needs, while Marcus himself tended to the emotional healing that would take far longer. The first days were difficult. She suffered nightmares that left her screaming and thrashing. She flinched at sudden movements. She expected punishment for perceived failures. Years of conditioning and abuse could not be erased simply because her tormentor was dead. But gradually, incrementally, she began to heal. Marcus was patient, protective without being smothering, present without being demanding. He sat with her during the nightmares, holding her hand and reminding her that she was safe. He brought her food personally, demonstrating that meals were no longer contingent on behavior. He listened when she was ready to talk, and gave her silence when words were too difficult. On the 4th day, she spoke her first complete sentence since awakening. "Why did you risk everything for me?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Because you are my mate. You? Because you are Omega, precious beyond measure, because you deserved protection that I failed to provide for too long. But most importantly, because in all my years as king, I had never encountered someone who maintained such dignity and compassion, despite suffering designed specifically to break both. You deserve to be saved for no reason beyond the fact that you are you." She cried then, the first tears she had shed since the binding broke. Not from pain or fear, but from relief and the slow, dawning understanding that she was truly free. Marcus held her while she wept, his own tears falling silently into her hair. They had both lost so much. Time that could have been spent together, years stolen by cruelty and conspiracy, trust that would take time to fully rebuild. But they had each other now, and the bond between them was strong enough to weather any storm. On one of these quiet evenings, as the nightmares became less frequent and her strength slowly returned, she finally asked about the name that had been forced upon her. In the assembly, they made me claim I was Seraphina Darkwater, an agent of vampires, a spy sent to deceive you. Her voice was steady, but carried undertones of the violation she had endured. I need you to know the truth. They forced me to speak those lies, held Maeve, Father Aldrich, and others hostage, threatened to torture them slowly if I did not perform exactly as scripted. But that was never my name. That was never my purpose. She met his eyes with fierce determination. I am Alara, last daughter of the Moon Whisper bloodline. That is my truth, not the lies they made me speak. Marcus pulled her close, his relief palpable. I know. My wolf always knew. The bond does not lie, even when everything else seems designed to deceive. You are Alara. You have always been Alara. And no performance extracted through torture could ever change that truth. The fifth day brought news that forced Marcus to turn his attention outward again. Vampire scouts had been spotted in unprecedented numbers along the border. Constantine was massing his forces for invasion, apparently deciding that Mordana's death and the conspiracy's failure meant there would be no better opportunity. He would strike soon, within days at most, hoping to capitalize on the chaos of internal purges before the kingdom could fully stabilize. Marcus called another war council, this time in the Great Hall with full court in attendance. Those nobles who had survived the purges with loyalty intact, military commanders preparing for combat, and representatives from allied pacts who had sent reinforcements upon learning of the crisis. The hall was packed with wolves in both human and shifted forms, all awaiting their alpha's direction. Prince Constantine of Bloodmere has decided that our internal troubles present opportunity for conquest, Marcus announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive space. He believes that having lost our chancellor and purged our traitors, we are weakened and vulnerable. He expects to overwhelm our defenses before we can properly organize resistance. He paused, letting the tension build. He is mistaken. Marcus gestured to where Alara stood beside his throne, still pale and thin, but growing stronger by the day. She wore robes that marked her as Luna, mate of the Alpha King, and around her neck hung the ancient silver pendant that denoted Omega status to those who understood its significance. The Moon Whisper bloodline was thought extinct, Marcus continued, but it survives in Lady Alara, last of her pack and an Omega of remarkable power. Constantine sought to break her, to transform her into a weapon he could use against us. He failed. Now she stands with us, and through her, we will demonstrate what happens when wolves unite under proper Alpha and Omega leadership. He could feel the pack bonds strengthening as he spoke, his Alpha authority combining with Alara's Omega influence to create resonance throughout every wolf in the hall. They felt it, that connection deepening and solidifying, transforming them from collection of individuals into true unified pack. I will not lie to you, Marcus said. The battle ahead will be difficult. Constantine has 500 warriors and dark magic to support them. We are outnumbered, and some of us will not survive the coming conflict. But we fight for our homes, our families, and our freedom. We fight as pack, bonded more completely than any vampire can comprehend, and we fight with the knowledge that our cause is just. The hall erupted in howls of support, wolves in both forms adding their voices to a chorus that shook the very stones. The sound carried beyond the castle walls, across the countryside, reaching allied packs and border posts and isolated homesteads. It was declaration and promise combined. They would fight, they would stand, and they would not fall easily to darkness. Preparations consumed the next 2 days. Defenses were strengthened, weapons were blessed and sharpened, tactics were refined based on intelligence about vampire capabilities and likely approach vectors. Civilians were evacuated to secure positions. Everything that could be done to prepare for siege warfare was done with grim efficiency. But the most important preparation happened in the training yards where Alara worked to master abilities she had barely begun to understand. Omega powers were instinctive, but required practice to use effectively. She could feel every wolf in the castle through the pack bonds, sense their emotional states, identify injuries or illnesses before physical symptoms manifested. With focus, she could soothe anger, ease fear, strengthen confidence. But doing so for hundreds of wolves simultaneously would require concentration and endurance she had not yet developed. Marcus trained with her, both of them pushing their limits. He needed to understand how the Protector's fury worked so he could call upon it deliberately, rather than waiting for instinct to trigger transformation. She needed to learn how to maintain mental links across entire battlefields without burning out from the effort. They worked until exhaustion forced rest, then rose and worked again, driven by the knowledge that lives would depend on their abilities functioning flawlessly when battle finally came. On the 7th night, scouts brought word that Constantine's army was moving. 500 vampire warriors, supplemented by human thralls and dark magic users, advancing in tight formation that suggested professional military discipline. They would reach the castle in 2 days, assuming normal marching pace. Battle was imminent. The vampire army arrived at dawn 2 days later, their banners black and crimson against pale morning sky. They formed up in precise ranks beyond arrow range, a display of discipline and power meant to intimidate defenders before battle even began. At their head rode Prince Constantine himself, ancient and terrible, his pale features beautiful in the way that poisonous things often are. Marcus stood on the castle walls with his commanders arrayed behind him, making no effort to hide his position or identity. He wanted Constantine to see him, to understand that the Alpha King had not been broken by conspiracy or political theater or any of the plots that had nearly succeeded. Alpha King Marcus, Constantine's voice carried across the open ground with supernatural clarity. I offer you one final opportunity for surrender. Open your gates. Deliver the Omega to me, accept vassalage to Bloodmere. Do these things and I will allow your people to live as subjects rather than cattle. Your offers grow less generous with each iteration, Marcus called back. First you promised me rule as puppet. Now you offer merely to spare lives. What comes next? Quick death instead of slow torture? I offer what you have earned through resistance, Constantine replied. You should have accepted Mordena's bargain when it was offered. Now the price increases with every moment you delay. Then let me counter with my own offer, Marcus said, his voice dropping to tones that carried alpha command across the battlefield. Turn back now. Return to Bloodmere. Never threaten my kingdom or my mate again. Do these things and I will let you leave with your army intact. Constantine laughed, the sound carrying notes of genuine amusement. Bold words for a king who stands outnumbered and besieged. Very well. Let us see if your courage matches your rhetoric. He raised his hand, and 500 vampires surged forward in coordinated assault. They moved with supernatural speed, closing the distance to the castle walls faster than human eye could easily track. Siege ladders were raised, grappling hooks were thrown. The first wave hit the defenses like dark tide crashing against stone breakwater. And that was when Alara activated the pack link. She stood in the center courtyard, eyes closed in concentration, reaching out with her Omega power to every wolf defender. The connection formed instantly, seamlessly, as if pack bonds had always been meant to function this way. Suddenly, 450 wolves found themselves linked in ways that transcended normal pack awareness. They could feel each other's positions, anticipate movements, coordinate attacks with the precision of single organism rather than separate fighters. When Vampire climbed ladder on the eastern wall, 3 wolves were already moving to intercept before he crested the battlements. When Dark Magic User began casting spell in the Vampire rear ranks, Archer had already adjusted aim to put Blessed Arrow through the caster's heart. When Vampire Commander tried to coordinate flanking maneuver, every wolf defender knew about it instantly and shifted positions to counter. The battle transformed from chaotic melee into dance of coordination. Wolves fought with efficiency that seemed almost supernatural, each supporting others, none operating in isolation, all functioning as extensions of single tactical consciousness distributed across hundreds of bodies. Marcus commanded from the walls, his alpha authority flowing through the link to reach every wolf simultaneously. He saw the battlefield through 450 sets of eyes, processed information faster than should be possible, issued orders that were executed before he finished forming the thoughts. And through it all, Ilara held the link steady, maintaining connections that should have burned out any normal Omega within minutes. But the vampires adapted. Constantine was ancient and experienced in warfare that spanned centuries. He recognized the coordination for what it was and began targeting wolves not to kill them, but to create psychic feedback through the link. Each death that Ilara experienced through the bond weakened her slightly. Each severe injury created dissonance in the connection. He was using the pack link against them, turning their greatest advantage into vulnerability. 15 wolves fell. Ilara gasped in the courtyard, experiencing each death through the link, her nose beginning to bleed from psychic strain. 30 wolves fell. She dropped to her knees, struggling to maintain connections that were fraying under accumulated trauma. 45 wolves fell. She screamed, the pain of so much shared death threatening to shatter her consciousness completely. Marcus felt her agony through the mate bond and made his decision. He could not reach her physically without abandoning his position on the walls. But the bond worked both ways, just as Father Aldrich had explained. Alpha and Omega balanced each other. If she could heal him, strengthen him, support him through her power, then he could do the same for her. He opened himself completely to the mate bond, dropping every barrier and defense, making himself vulnerable in ways that alphas were never supposed to risk. His strength flowed through the connection, his will supporting hers, his absolute conviction that they would survive this lending her courage when her own threatened to fail. They shared the burden together, both feeling the deaths, but splitting the psychic impact between them, making it bearable, where alone it would have been overwhelming. The pack link stabilized, grew stronger, and now it was not just Omega coordination, but Alpha command flowing through the connections. Marcus directed strategy, while Ilara maintained the network that allowed instant communication. Together they transformed 450 individual wolves into a weapon that no vampire army could overwhelm through sheer numbers. The tide turned. Vampires who had been steadily advancing found themselves pushed back. Siege ladders were thrown down, grappling hooks were cut, the walls held against assault that should have overwhelmed them through attrition and supernatural advantage. Constantine saw his strategy failing and made his own gambit. He charged the main gate personally, surrounded by his most elite warriors, intending to smash through defenses through overwhelming concentration of power at single point. If he could breach the gate, his forces could pour into the courtyard where coordination advantages would matter less in close quarters chaos. Marcus saw the vampire prince's intention through dozens of sets of eyes and realized that this was the moment everything balanced on. If Constantine broke through, the battle was lost. If he could be stopped, repelled, defeated, then the vampire army would break and scatter. The Protector's fury rose in response to the threat against his mate and his pack. But this time, Marcus controlled it, shaped it, directed it with conscious intent rather than letting instinct take over completely. He shifted into the hybrid form, that impossible state between man and wolf, and launched himself from the battlements toward the main gate where Constantine prepared his final assault. They met in the open ground before the castle entrance, Alpha King and Vampire Prince, champions representing their respective forces. The combat that followed was beyond anything mortal witnesses could properly describe. Speed that blurred vision, strength that shattered stone, technique refined through centuries meeting instinct, honed through countless battles. They were evenly matched in ways that made the fight seem almost choreographed. Every attack met with counter, every opening exploited simultaneously. Neither could gain decisive advantage through pure martial skill. The battle would be decided by which of them wanted victory more, which could push past exhaustion and pain to land one final decisive blow. Marcus felt Ilara through the bond, felt her pouring strength into him even as she maintained links across 400 wolves, felt her absolute faith that he would triumph, felt the mate bond itself, lending power that transcended normal alpha capabilities, and he channeled all of it, everything she gave him and everything he possessed himself, into one strike. His claws found opening in Constantine's defense, drove through the vampire's guard, and pierced the undead heart. The ancient prince gasped, blood frothing at his lips, his eyes wide with shock that he had finally met defeat after 8 centuries of victory. "This is not over," Constantine managed to whisper. "Other princes will come. The war between our kinds is eternal." "Perhaps," Marcus agreed, twisting his claws to ensure the damage was fatal. "But today, you lost, and that will have to be enough." He withdrew his claws and let the vampire fall. Constantine's body hit the ground and began to decay rapidly as death finally claimed what had been unnaturally preserved for centuries. The vampire army, seeing their prince fallen, broke formation. Some fled immediately. Others fought on briefly before being overwhelmed. Within an hour the battle was over, the siege broken, and Shadow Peak saved. Marcus stood in the aftermath, covered in blood and gore, exhausted beyond measure, but victorious. Around him, his wolves howled in triumph, the sound echoing off the mountains and carrying across territories for dozens of miles. They had won. Against overwhelming odds and supernatural enemies, they had defended their home and their Luna. Alara finally released the pack link, the connections dissolving gently rather than snapping, allowing each wolf to return to individual consciousness without trauma. She collapsed completely, every ounce of strength spent, but Marcus was there to catch her before she hit the ground. He held her close, heedless of the blood covering them both, and felt profound gratitude that they had survived to see another day. The days that followed were spent rebuilding and healing. The conspiracy's remaining members were dealt with according to law. Reforms were implemented to prevent similar corruption from taking root again. Alliances were strengthened with neighboring packs who had sent aid during the crisis. And throughout it all, Marcus and Alara worked together to heal not just their kingdom, but each other. 6 months later, they stood before assembled court for formal wedding ceremony. Alara wore white and silver, reclaiming Moonwhisper heritage. Marcus wore ceremonial armor, every inch the warrior king. Father Aldrich pronounced them bound before Moon Goddess and Pack. The assembled wolves howled approval that shook the heavens, celebration of an Alpha and Omega united through genuine love forged in fire and trauma and absolute commitment. The feast lasted 3 days, but the moments Marcus treasured most were the quiet ones afterward. Late at night in their chambers, Alara curled against his chest, breathing deep and even with sleep that came without nightmares. The mate bond pulsing gently between them, steady as a heartbeat, strong as mountains. She still had difficult days, but she was healing, growing stronger, becoming the Omega she was always meant to be. And Marcus had learned lessons that made him better king. That efficiency was no substitute for justice. That trust must be earned, that the most important battles were not always fought on obvious battlefields. Years later, their legacy lived not in monuments, but in daily choices of ordinary wolves who remembered their example, who protected the vulnerable, who questioned authority that seemed too flawless, who never allowed efficiency to become excuse for cruelty. The Wolf King and his Omega Luna, forever changed by what they endured, forever stronger because they endured it together.